Watch this.
Has there ever been this much money spent on a spring election in Idaho? It might surprise you to hear even the Secretary of State is surprised by the amount of cash being pumped into primary campaigns. It seems there's a day for everything, but with bikes and getting to work, there's also a week and a month. All of those things come together to illustrate how the city of Boise is hoping to make it better to ride your bike to work. It was a mystery discovered more than 2 decades ago. However, the clues to solving it point to several more decades in the past. We crack the conundrum of the concrete arrows. The phrase "follow the money" has been linked to American politics since the 1970s. You want an explanation for an elected official's inexplicable vote? Follow the money. You want to know who has supported a certain candidate's campaign? Again, follow the money. It's why we have sunshine laws, the campaign finance requirements for candidates to file paperwork on who donated to their cause. And it's why those files are public. Well, that filing takes place monthly, and information on the latest influx of cash into Idaho just dropped just before the primary. Yes, there's a lot of money filling campaign accounts from Idaho sources, but there seems to be a surprising amount coming in from out of state this cycle. And that money has been spent on things we've already talked about, commercials and mailers that aren't exactly in good faith or even close to being accurate. Think Young Americans for Liberty and their funding push in several key legislative races. Ads targeting House Speaker Mike Moyle, for example, or Julianne Young, or a trio of Canadian County senators. Those communications come through phone calls, text messages, you name it, it's out there. YAL is not alone in this quest. They just appear to be the biggest spender so far. So the question is, what will we see when final primary finances are filed and made public in June? Joe Paris joins me now. Joe, you spoke with the Secretary of State about this flood of funds. What are his thoughts on all this money coming into Idaho?
Well, he was genuinely surprised, and Secretary of State Phil McGrain has been in the election game here in Idaho for quite some time. He was, of course, the deputy clerk and the clerk of Ada County elections, largest county in Idaho. So yes, it's very unusual for sure. And Secretary of State McGrain, he stopped by today for a special viewpoint feature that's up right now at ktvb.com, talking about all the big election topics and answering your questions ahead of Tuesday. But I asked Secretary McGrain about the report from Andrew Bartline about the jump in PAC fundraising, and something simple right away stuck out.
I think one of the really shocking things is just the amount of money that we're seeing stream through Idaho politics. Over the last 48 hours, we've seen over $1 million in independent expenditures. So those political action committees sending out all the mailers, TV ads, other things that are going on right now in Idaho.
So what is the historical context of everything we're seeing? Secretary of State weighs in. Have you seen anything like this, even as Ada County Clerk, in terms of just this flood of money towards the end?
No, this really is unprecedented. This is my first primary election in this seat compared to when I was at the county role. But even compared to the past with Secretary Denny or Secretary Usursa, there's just so much more money, and in particular, money coming from out of state. I know there's a lot of people trying to track everything that's going on, and I've seen one person, a voter, posted a photo where they had 12 different mailers just on one day in terms of both attacks and opposition, and it was just about one race. And so there's a lot going on right now. In addition to just at the county clerk's offices, you know, Trent and the team at Ada County are getting everything ready, getting the supplies distributed for voting next Tuesday.
Yeah, so as the Secretary of State's office and the county clerks around Idaho are getting ready, they got a lot to deal with. So following Andrew's reports that we played for you last week of false portrayals of Idaho candidates from out-of-state groups, I saw a few of you asking about the rules around that. And I'll paraphrase what one of you actually mentioned to me at the grocery store last week. So can candidates just lie about anything? And I talked that through with the Secretary.
You know, one of the challenges too, because I know you guys get this on the 208 all the time, we monitor the spending and the finances. We don't monitor the content. So when you guys do verify and you're doing the fact checking, we'll leave that to you guys. In terms of just because of the free speech protections on political speech, we don't get into like, oh, so-and-so said this about me and so-and-so said that. And we do see some of those complaints coming in as well.
Because there is protected speech, and I know that one of the big stories this past week was, well, there's this out-of-state group and they're lying about voting records. And it's like, well, it's not, maybe you could say it's not ethical or it's not appropriate, but it is legal.
Yes, I think that's one challenge. And as a candidate myself, I can easily relate to everyone, and it is frustrating. And seeing the nastiness and kind of the vitriol that we're seeing is really particularly frustrating because I don't think it fits our state. But unfortunately, it is protected speech. You know, I jokingly like to say we fought very hard so that we could speak badly about King George, and that really comes to the core of our country. The First Amendment is a strong protection, and so political speech is one of these tough things. And I know, again, both for voters who are seeing stuff and saying, like, I know that person, this isn't true. I mean, again, you guys cover that all the time. It would be nice if there was more civility in our politics.
So, Brian, you mentioned that in June we'll get really a clear picture of the campaign finance data. The filing deadline is June 10th.
Okay.
So there's really a strategic way of, okay, how are we going to start spending? When do we want to start spending? Because if you can't really see the reports till after the election, well, at that point it's already said and done. And at that point, a candidate might have already lost, and it's over till November. So It's an interesting conversation. We'll circle back to this in about a month.
The vitriol doesn't seem to fit our state, he says, but a lot of people seem to be pretty comfortable with it right now.
It's a lot of out-of-state money too, though. But the game has changed. We know that.
All right, thanks, Joe. Well, if the recent rash of downtown construction hasn't already forced your hand off the wheel and onto a set of handlebars, maybe you might be inspired to do so tomorrow. This week is National Bike to Work Week, which culminates with National Bike to Work Day on Friday. All of this under the umbrella of May being Bike Month. So should you partake in pedaling yourself to your place of employment in downtown Boise tomorrow, there's good news. You'll get to skip a few detours by way of the sidewalk. Bad news, City of Boise says that allowance is only temporary. Good news, all that road construction you'll be bypassing is going to create some new bike lanes. They're investing in designs that bike advocates say are safer with long-term payoffs to make Boise, quote, the bicycle capital of America. Here's Andrew Bartline.
Investments in the downtown Boise core surround you.
How bad the traffic is.
A new meaning to everywhere, all at once.
We do need to get better at the way that we coordinate all those things going on at the same time so there's less of an interruption.
But there's a method to the madness.
Well, hopefully it's the sound of progress.
Road construction's a welcome tune to City Council member Jimmy Halliburton.
Well, 2023 was probably the deadliest year for bicycle and pedestrian fatalities in Ada County's history.
For nearly 2 decades, he's worked to make Boise
I love this handlebar.
bikeable.
That thing is awesome.
A pronounced push, now pedaled by Boise Bicycle Project's Nina Pinar.
We're really there advocating for what we want and what we would like to see.
What is wrong with this?
Yeah.
Like, this is a bike lane.
Very often, the usual bike lane that we see in the US is this classic white line on the road. But the white line on the road doesn't really keep us safe. So what us bike advocates are advocating for at the moment is we want to see separated bike lanes.
Just that simple separation, it's what brings cycling advocates together with the agencies to boot.
We've started to see ACHD and the City of Boise really making sure that when we're talking about transportation, we're talking about transportation for all users. People who are driving, people who are taking the bus, people who are walking, and people who are biking.
As Boise starts to unveil the new roads,
It's so great to see this progress.
we already see a template
There,
on 11th Street.
and you can see how we're separated both from the car traffic, both from the cars, but also, from our barrier right here. So nice protected bike lane where there's an intersection that's nice and painted.
These are just the visible parts of the best practices learned over the years of hard lessons.
Speed kills. So if somebody gets hit going over 20 miles per hour, their likelihood of surviving is really, really small.
And where Boise's at its busiest, it's best to brake.
A little flashy signs of like, hey, you're entering a slow zone, you have to go 20 miles per hour.
And if not by the word of the law, new designs will still calculate the life-saving speed reduction on all the hot corners.
A nice, gradual turn, a car can really zip around there. But if they have to come to the intersection and take a sharp 90-degree turn, they're going to almost have to come to a stop before they do it.
It's nothing but a nuisance today.
It really is a challenge, and I definitely get it.
But they say the payoff's louder.
Progress, yeah, absolutely.
Better roads,
It will last for 50, 60 plus years.
better for bikes. Soon to be everywhere, all at once.
And making it safer for everybody in the process.
Boise City Council created the Traffic Fatality Review Task Force in September of last year. The idea is to review any incident and understand what those common denominators are that make an intersection safe or dangerous. Some of those early findings are seen here, including those sharp intersections to force cars to slow down, potentially come to a stop before they make their turn. BBP says every single road project you see downtown has some form bike accessibility,
Yeah.
safety, and those protected lanes being a big piece of it.
Okay, my question, I've seen those downtown. I think it doesn't happen a lot, but when we do get snow downtown, snow plows go through, clear out the streets. What about clearing out those paths? How does that work?
Get a hand and shovel. Maybe they got like a
guess.
four-wheeler, you know?
It might fit a four-wheeler, you're right.
Yeah, so I mean, you're not getting a big plow in there if it's
Yeah.
curbed off, but I don't know, same thing. If a car's parked there, how do you plow the snow? You just block the car in.
I guess so. We'll find out in December, I guess. All right,
Yeah.
thanks, Andrew. There's a point of interest southeast of Boise that for decades has gone unnoticed by a lot of people, probably because most people's perspective has been a little too close to the ground. But 24 years ago today, Idaho Life reporter John Miller found it with the help of the man who needed help finding out what it was. First, they had to find it, and then they could follow the clues that could possibly point them in the direction of solving the case of the cryptic concrete.
So did you ever see the beginning of Gilligan's Island? They set out on the 3-hour tour.
Yes.
In horribly inclement weather.
Yes.
It's kind of like where we're heading right now. David Rosencrantz and I and David's extremely hyper dog Boris about to run through your screen right now.
Beautiful.
Climbing up this monster long hill into a horrific lightning storm.
Wow.
Gee, guess who gets to carry the giant metal tripod? Just up here, huh?
Right up here.
Actually, the camera guy was standing on the very point of that which we're trying to find the point.
Don't know.
What do you think, about 50 feet?
Yeah.
50 feet long.
Yeah.
A 50-foot concrete arrow David's found out in the middle of nowhere among the wildflowers with no clue of who built it or when or why, so high above everything, yet pointing to nothing. I mean, why?
I don't know. That's what you're going to find out.
I'd say it's 3 miles east of and pointing directly to the Boise factory outlets, but if I had to guess, maybe an airport beacon?
Could be. I don't know. From a long time ago, maybe.
Early Oregon Trail marker.
Could be.
Predecessor to the better-known Table Rock Monument. Arrow Rock.
Don't know.
We could just call it Boris Point.
Yeah, could.
But as far as the arrow story, we don't exactly know the point, I guess.
Ooh.
I can crack the bad puns anywhere. So any other thoughts before we click this one off and put it to the public?
No, just as long as we can get out of here before we get hit by lightning.
John Miller, Idaho's News Channel 7.
And they did get out of there before they got hit by lightning. And John's first guess was closer to what it is. Back when that story first aired in 2000, John Miller said they asked the Boise Airport management about the arrow out there, and they had no idea why it was there. Local pilots he spoke to at the time told him they'd never noticed it. But it did not take long for emails to come into the newsroom and explain the existence and the point of the concrete arrows. Plural, because there are more than one of them in Idaho. They were part of a cross-country mapped-out airmail route from the 1930s, and Boise was one of those stops on the Western Spur. In 1903, getting from point A to point B suddenly got more interesting, thanks to the Wright brothers. If people could get around by plane, well, so could their stuff, like a lightweight letter. About 15 years after that first flight, the idea of delivering mail by air started bouncing around what was then called the U.S. Post Office Department.
By 1918, the U.S. Post Office Department had convinced Congress to appropriate some funds to try to test some of these ideas to even see if it was possible.
It was, with some help.
Because the Post Office Department, of course, didn't own planes and they didn't employ pilots. They employed mail carriers.
Cue the Kelly Act. In 1925, Congress allowed the U.S. Post Office to contract with commercial pilots to carry the mail. So that settled the who. What about the how? Well, they didn't have to start from scratch.
They looked across the country and they were really hoping to build on a transcontinental route that the U.S. Army had helped develop between 1918 and 1925.
One of those routes?
From Pasco, Washington to Elko, Nevada.
With a stopover in Boise. But who would run that route?
There was an individual who had been very instrumental in building the aviation industry, and his name was Walter Varney.
Varney, a World War I vet, owned and operated a flight school, so he had access to pilots. Pilots like Leon Cuddyback. Remember that name, not that it isn't memorable.
But in Boise, we didn't have an airstrip in 1925.
Varney also had access to land, buying a flat piece of property south of the Boise River.
And although it had trees and some brush, they were able to clear that acreage and build an airstrip.
Back to Cuddyback. On April 6, 1926, he headed to Elko, taking off from Pasco in a single-engine plane with just one bag of mail. An overland trip that would normally take 49 hours.
They departed at 6 a.m., and it took him about 4 hours to make it to Boise.
Cuddyback touched down to fanfare, but he didn't stay on the ground for long. He picked up Boise's bundle and took off for Elko. Once there, Franklin Rose, another Varney pilot, was waiting to return along the same route.
He unfortunately encounters some very bad weather, is blown about 75 miles off course, and he has to crash land in southwestern Idaho in a grain field.
Rose survived, and so did the mailbag.
Ultimately, Rose ended up walking with mail, carrying some of it by horseback, and then ultimately driving it back into Boise so that it could then be put on a plane and that route could be continued to Pasco.
A turbulent start for sure to the Boise Spur, but they didn't stay grounded for long. Okay, so Varney went on to start passenger service and then eventually helped establish United Airlines in 1930. By 1931, the airmail routes were still going, and at the time, radio communication for airplanes was pretty sketchy. So the Department of Commerce set out to set up these navigational aids to help them on their airmail routes. Arrows, originally painted yellow with space for a beacon tower in the middle. That's that square spot. They were spaced every 10 miles, with emergency airstrips built every 25 miles. Pilots could see the beacon in the distance, fly over it, and then see which direction they need to fly to make it to the nearest airstrip. The Pasco to Boise to Elko route was removed and replaced by the Pasco to Boise to Burley to Salt Lake City route, to Salt Lake City, that is, in 1933. And by 1940s, radio communication had improved, proving the arrows unnecessary. But some of those arrows still exist, as you can see, and they're in places like Du Bois and the ghost town of Strevel, Idaho, which is just a mile north of the Utah border. So they're out there. And the arrow John Miller hiked to in 2000, well, that's still there as well. But it is on private property. mishap today in the murder trial of Chad Daybell. There's also a ceremony honoring police officers who died in the line of duty and a test to ensure Ada County's election machines are working properly. Those are some of the stories in today's 411 on the 208.
The prosecution rested its case in Chad Daybell's murder trial today, but not without a roadblock. After the prosecution rested their case, Judge Boise pointed out a clerical mistake in the charging document. Prosecutors changed the governing indictment against Chad in February of this year, and under count 4, first-degree murder of J.J. Vallow, they put the wrong dates. The amended indictment says J.J. was killed on or between September 8th and 9th of 2019, which is when Tylee was killed. But the judge acknowledged the inconsistency wasn't done on purpose and denied the defense's request for an acquittal. Hundreds gathered to honor Idaho's fallen officers during a memorial ceremony. The annual event was held at the Idaho Peace Officers Memorial in Meridian. The memorial ceremony gives family members, community members, and colleagues a chance to honor the lives of officers across the state who've fallen in the line of duty. Today, 76 names of Idaho's fallen officers were read. With the 2024 primary election right around the corner, the Ada County Elections Office finished a successful logic and accuracy test today. The test runs a set of test ballots with predetermined votes to determine the accuracy of the election software. The office says the tabulation room will be locked down until Election Day. There's 2 key dates coming up next week for Idaho voters. The first will be the Idaho primary election on May 21st. Polls are open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. The second is Democratic Presidential Caucus on May 23rd. The caucus is solely for registered Democrats and unaffiliated voters. That's the 411 on the 208. I'm Aspen Shumpert.
It's a beautiful day outside right now, 85 degrees over in Boise, and you wouldn't know by looking at out the window right now that there are some changes on the way. So starting tomorrow morning, valley locations are going to feel those winds starting to pick up. Strongest gusts are expected to be in the Magic Valley and areas in the eastern Magic Valley. However, if you want to kind of get ahead of this, the wind gusts are not the only part of this. The wind speeds will be very consistent as well. It's one of those days where we won't be able to escape the wind. So a couple suggestions for you in valley locations as we take a look at your 7-day forecast. You can see also with the winds, much cooler temperatures. So we are cooling down tomorrow, but the winds will be the bigger story. You can see temperatures warm back up for Saturday before they moderate for the rest of your 7-day forecast.
All right, just about a minute left. Let's get to your comments. This one from Larry. If campaign laws worked, no outside influence would be allowed. As for civility, that was lost in 2016. Probably a little further back than that. I plan to vote for the GOP candidates who are being viciously attacked by their opponents or by the far-right out-of-state players. Why would anyone want to be represented by candidates who attack others in such a nasty, unethical manner, says Steve. Well, it's happening on both sides, actually, depending on where you are, what mailers you may be getting, and where you live. So you might be limiting your chances of who you can vote for, Steve, if that's your criteria. Since politicians can lie in their campaigns, can they still be subjected to defamation laws if they falsely claim something slanderous as fact about another candidate? No, short answer, Jeremy from Boise. We also get this question. If these are not true, why are we still running them? Well, this is how TV stations make their money, and the FCC says we can't censor any of these. And if we accept one, we got to accept them all, and it's up to the viewer, you, the voter, to kind of sort it out. They can say whatever they want. You have to sort it out. We'll help you out once in a while, but the rest is up to you.